I'm AP Townley, and this is Roleplay Culture. Today, we're going to review the prequel novels to the movie Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. There's a spoiler warning here, so if you wish to not hear any spoilers for the movie or for the books, move on. Our first book today is Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, The Road to Neverwinter by J. Lee Johnson, which came out in February of this year. And let me just say, that is a very long title. Any title that requires 2 colons needs to calm down. This type of story is a wraparound story. It is a story of the bard Edgin telling a bedtime story to his daughter, Kira. And the story is how the party, the core party, got together, how they all met, and a few of their first adventures over the years as she was growing up. Our story starts off with Edgin, who is newly widowed, and the infant Kira. He is poor, he is grieving, and he is in desperate straits. He meets Holga, the barbarian, who is also in dire straits. She's been exiled from her clan, the Elk tribe, for marrying her husband, who was an outsider, and unfortunately, that marriage didn't pan out. So she is also looking for somewhere to belong. She finds Edgin in a bar and takes him home and just kind of never leaves and helps him raise the child together. They are in desperate straits money-wise, so they end up robbing a local pawn dealer. That's their first crime together. And then they set him up with a Zentarum, which is like the mafia. So he'll take the fall for it. Some time passes, and they meet Forge the Rogue at the same local bar. Like all good parties, they're brought together by a bar fight. In this case, a bunch of gnolls attack and ransack and run off with people. So the three of them get together and go slay the gnolls and become local heroes, even though they were really just more out for revenge than anything. So Kira's about 9 at this point, and they take a new job. They're going to a nearby village where an island is being overrun. People are disappearing. They've hired a local sorcerer, but he's kind of gone missing too. Well, they leave Kira behind. They do the smart thing and leave the 9-year-old behind to her objections, and they go investigate these disappearances. They find the island overrun with vines, and the deeper in the island they go, the more aggressive these vines get, and they start attacking them. And who should they find? Oh, they find Simon, our sorcerer, being strangled to death. And just so you know, this is a side point of Simon getting into a lot of trouble and having to be bailed out in weird ways by the different people in the parties. So they do a little investigating, and they find this cave. It looks like somebody has already gotten to the cave. Wonder who that could be. So the 4 of them, including Simon, go into the cave, and they find our villain, the one who's summoning all these deadly vines. It's a green hag. Kind of like this. No, not that. This. Yes, that's it. She's accompanied by a roper, which is like a stalagmite with teeth and tentacles. And who has found these villains before the party? Well, that would be the 9-year-old girl. That's right, when you have a 9-year-old girl who has an amulet that turns her invisible and a rebellious streak, she'll find a way to come along. And is that going to be difficult to get out of? Well, no, not really. Actually, it's the little girl that kind of, gets them out of everything and solves the problem and lets them know that the green hag is actually controlling the roper. Simon turns out to be a very skittish kind of fellow, and his magic tends to fail, and he has no confidence whatsoever. But he has an interesting repertoire of spells. He, usually sorcerers kind of blow things up all the time, and, he has things that enhance the senses, dispels magic, counter spells. Those are all interesting choices for a sorcerer to have. And when his life's in danger, he kind of comes into his own, and yes, the little girl Kira kind of wins the day, but at the same time, they couldn't have done it without him. And you start seeing his growth as a character from here, and that's very important for the movie as well. Turns out Simon needed some money. He wanted to buy information for his next big heist, the burglary of the dragonborn archwizard, Torlin. As a side note, all good adventuring companies have names. Vox Machina, Fellowship of the Ring, Simon lovingly names theirs, the Crime Club. Everyone hates it. So to prepare for this adventure, they do what any good D&D party does. They start learning their routines. They learn their schedules. They prepare. They figure out all kinds of schemes that can get them in, get them out. If it turns out this Torlin has a bit of a bad reputation. He's become cruel. He battled a beholder, or the Ire Tyrant, as they sometimes call it, Sherestrin. He won, but it seems to have taken a toll on his sanity. He's become almost evil. So to help win their way in, they need an invitation, because it turns out Torlin holds many, many parties at his estate. Over and over again, so many parties. And they figure if they wait for the right time, they can go to a masquerade party and hide their faces behind masks. But to get this invitation, they'll have to find someone. And it turns out Forge knows someone who can get them in, who has an invitation for them to copy. And this someone is the mysterious woman, Sophina. And she becomes very important in the movie. They meet her, and Forge brings along the smooth-talking bard and his adorable daughter, Kira, because adorable always wins. This woman's very strange. Even the little girl just finds something very off about her. Is she part of some secret organization? Well, they just don't know, do they? But they will find out. So the time has come. They make their way into the mansion, mingle amongst the party. They find a lot of strange things. There's bad poetry reading in one room, a huge orchestra in another room that's attached to the ceiling for some strange reason. Tapestries alike, everywhere. And Torlin likes to show off his greatest prize, the staff o' Orth. Orth? It's this word. Which is capable of both joy and destruction. So they find their way into the vault. And there it is. There's the staff and much, much treasure and other magical items. Or is it? Simon, clever little sausage that he is, he realizes this staff is fake. It's an illusion. And from this illusion, he finds a secret back door to the vault, which leads to a strange mirror mansion dungeon that's below the estate. And it's full of traps, but no people. Well, they do what a good D&D party does and decides to write the staff off and get the heck out of there. Except they can't, because the door's closed, and now they're trapped. So they have to go through this mirror dungeon, and they have no choice. But as they move through, they realize there are clues in the mansion above that's letting them get through the traps. The orchestra, turns out that there are rocks that fall unless you dance a particular dance through the ballroom. What dance is that? Well, it's Torlin's favorite dance. His favorite drink, his favorite poem, his favorite tapestries are all clues that help them maneuver along through the dungeon. And finally, again, they do what a good D&D party does, and after being attacked by a basilisk, decide to, instead of continue to go through the death trap, they go through a hole that the basilisk makes. And what should they find through this hole? They find a prison full of more monsters. And oh yeah, they find Torlin, the wizard. The real one. Yes, the real wizard. Because it turns out, when Torlin fought that beholder before, Sherestrin, he did not win. He lost. And the beholder took his place, assumed his guise, and locked him below here. He wants the staff, but the staff is damaged. And to repair it, it needs both joy and despair. The joy, the parties above, they feed the staff and help heal one side of it. But clues throughout the mansion lead would-be thieves down through the mirror dungeon and extends their suffering the further along they get. Torlin knows the way out. They free him. They get above, and along the way they realize that he has become very insane from his imprisonment, and they're okay with that. They figure, let Torlin fight the beholder and they will escape. But nay, that does not happen. You are in a beholder's lair, and there's no getting out without him knowing. So they must battle this beholder, and Simon has figured out a way. He realizes that the staff If they can sunder it, if they can break it, they can create an explosion great enough to destroy the Eye Tyrant. But Torlin doesn't like that. He's fought too hard to let someone else take his kill, and he tries to stop Simon. But Simon, at a final moment when he really needs to, he counterspells Torlin's magic and sunders the staff, killing the Eye Tyrant. And they all escape with the treasure, or at least some of it anyway. So my critique of this book is pretty good. I think it's a pretty good read, especially if you're planning on watching the movie. You can see the movie, some of the things in here, especially the introduction of Sophina, who's a villain, would be pretty good to actually have read this beforehand. We see some interesting locations. We see Longsaddle, which is a town that is often not featured in movies or anything. It pretends to be a very big adventuring town, Not big enough to be a city, but small enough for adventurers to be needed. I think some of the language in the book is a little too modern. It's not a good fit for certain fantasy realms. Like they use the term mail order at some point. Doesn't quite work. We see gnolls, beholders, sturges, hags, ropers, basilisks. Good set of monsters. We have slivers of spider climbing, different potions, and an invisibility amulet. Those are all interesting. Yeah, I think it's a good choice. And now it's time for our next story. Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, The Feast of the Moon by Jeremy Lambert, which came out in March of this year. And let's say those titles aren't getting any shorter, are they? This is a graphic novel, and it starts off with a bang, with the party being thrown out of the back of a caravan for trying to steal something. They end up in some out-of-the-way town that's holding a festival called the Feast of the Moon, which is a little like Dia de los Muertos, where the families will create effigies of their lost loved ones. In this case, the dwarven innkeeper Mai and her klutzy daughter Murin. They are grieving over their lost Grunald, the husband. After finding out they're adventurers, she tells them, there's a bandit king and his gang of criminals that are taxing the town zealously. And she asks the party if they would take care of it. And being good, enterprising adventurers, they agree. And they don't just take her money, they go around to basically every other proprietor trying to get paid for the exact same job over and over and over again. That's just smart D&D work right there. Well, they confront the bandits and immediately get wrecked. And they're taken before the bandit king, who, well, it turns out is Grunald, the dead husband, only he's not that dead. Turns out he tried to weasel his way through the organization, telling them where the best loot was, and he figured he could take it over and, turn it to his own purposes and get it away from the town, which didn't really work out, because it turns out that this organization is run by a dracolich. That's the real leader. He's the puppet leader now. So, is it hard for the party to get out of this tough situation? Well, no, because they brought their daughter, Kira, who's about 11 or so now. And yeah, she gets them out of it with her magical amulet. Did I mention that they brought the small child who had a deadly encounter with a beholder along this heist as well? Oh, I did? Oh, good. The one pretty interesting thing about this particular story, The Feast of the Moon, is that you see the relationship between the rebellious Kira and the roguish Forge become closer, and that's important for the movie. So the story gets wrapped up pretty well, pretty easy. Honestly, you could probably skip this one. But the story's not over, because at the end of this graphic novel, there's a second story. It's a bit shorter. It takes about a third of the book, I think. And it's Xenk and the Helmet of Disjunction. Yes, we get to meet our paladin. And more importantly, the MacGuffin from the film, the Helmet of Disjunction, we find out how it got into Xenk's possession and what he did with it. In the movie, spoiler alert, we know that Xenk obtains the helmet, and we know it ends up in this dungeon that he leads the party to. But we don't know the story in between. This is that story. So Xenk has this helmet, and anyone he takes it to that he wants to possess the helmet to keep it safe has no interest. They don't want bad guys coming after them, and they don't want it blowing up their own magic. Everyone else wants to use it for evil purposes, and he's running away from them. So he makes the very interesting decision to travel into the Underdark, and if you play D&D, you know what a terrible idea that is. He immediately runs into the twins, Trick and Trap, very appropriate names. Sverfneblin, or Deep Gnomes, they trick him out of the helmet. But their motives are not entirely evil. It turns out their people have been enslaved by illithids, or mind flayers. Basically tentacle-headed, brain-eating mind controllers. They've taken over their clan and are using them as slave labor. And Xenk, along with the two twins, help break them free and kill the Elder Brain, the big floating brain that controls the other mind flayers. And he leaves the helmet in their possession and asks them to build traps and keep it safe. What's interesting, though, how old is Xenk? Seems like he's a bit older than you might think. Of the two stories, this is definitely the one that I would recommend reading before you see the movie. The one that actually serves as a prequel. And you could pass on the other one, in my opinion. So we've met most of the party now, haven't we? The rogue, the barbarian, the bard, the sorcerer, even the paladin. Who are we missing? We're missing the druid, Doric. Well, that's okay, because she gets an entire novel to herself. Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, The Druid's Call. Man, these titles. It's by E.K. Johnston, and it came out in February this year. This story is structured in a 2-year gap that takes place in the movie, interspersed with flashbacks to Doric's childhood. It starts with Doric trying to fit in amongst a bunch of wood elves. She is a tiefling, and therefore stands out and feels almost like an outsider. We learn from her childhood that she was mistreated badly by her parents, locked in the attic. Even when her own sister was born, she was kept separated. And when she finally was able to escape to see her own family, well, they drugged her and dropped her off in the woods. She found her way back, but realized they didn't want her. So she journeyed into the deep and was assisted by a strange white owl that almost showed her how to hunt, how to survive in the woods, and during desperate times led her to a colony of elves who took care of her and helped her grow up. She's raised by her guardian, Leovaris, and her best friend, Toriath. As a tiefling, she can see in the dark, she's pretty much immune to fire, and she can eat anything, which is pretty interesting, even bark and stones. It's actually how she manages to make herself feel like less of a burden. She only eats a little bit from the communal pot and just goes off and eats whatever else she can get a hold of. Bugs, rocks, whatever. She's training to be a ranger amongst the elves, but she's terrible at it. But she has a good amount of empathy with other animals and even saves her friend Toria from a bear. She finds out the humans from Neverwinter, they exist in the Neverwinter woods, which is like an idyllic place with no bad weather or anything like that. But the humans from the nearby city of Neverwinter, which has a new lord, are starting to overlog their home, and the elves are scared. Once they realize that Doric is very good with animals, they realize, well, she can make a good druid, and they send her south to Baldur's Gate and to the Emerald Enclave, which is a worldwide organization that keeps the balance of nature. There she meets another tiefling, and what's interesting is we have two different kinds of tieflings here. She is a very old school tiefling, looks mostly human. Tail, small horns, pointy ears, but for the most part could pass for human. The other tiefling they find, his name is Open, which is a very traditional name for tieflings in 5th edition. He looks much more less human, with a big tail and a very different colored skin. So while training among the druids, there's a severe wildfire, and there, trying to defend another acolyte, she meets an owlbear, a strange owlbear, because it's white, which is usually only found in the north. And her understanding of the owls and the bears that she's encountered, she realizes this thing is not a monster, it's just out of place, and it's scared and hungry. So she's able to turn herself into an owlbear and leads it to safety. Her people call her home after a while. The logging and the humans are becoming much more dangerous. And after she arrives home, she has to save their sacred tree from villainous loggers. Along the way, she meets the sorcerer Simon several times. It is a bit dense in her interactions with him. She doesn't realize that she's trying to court her. She can't quite figure out why this weird human, or he's a half-elf actually, why this weird half-elf keeps showing up and wanting to talk to her. We know that most of the modern day points of this story take place during a 2-year gap that takes place in the movie. In the movie, there's a heist that goes wrong, and there's 2 years where some of the main characters are in prison. This story takes place here, and it ends with Doric receiving a letter from the sorcerer asking for her help. And that leads us into the events of the movie. This is probably number 2 on my list of prequels that you should read for this. The Road to Neverwinter was definitely to be number 1, and I would read this one after. You could probably save the graphic novel for another day. So that's it. That's my review / summary of the books. If you like them, go buy them and read them in detail, and I highly suggest you watch the movie. So I'll see you next time in the parlor.